Good morning and welcome to today's Dream to Travel Forum. Today we will be looking at courage. First of all, let me introduce myself fairly quickly here. My name is Paul Brancan. I am Director of Communications and External Affairs. As I said, this week we'll be looking at, our theme for the Dream to Travel Festival is courage. We've been celebrating the courage of our frontline workers, those who've had to work and haven't had the opportunity to work at home or shelter in place. But we also want to take this opportunity to celebrate the courage of our members, partners, and the community that have been working hard to rebuild and recover the travel and tourism industry to make it more sustainable, responsible, and resilient as we come out of the global pandemic. This week, we're happy to be partnering with our destination partner, Tourism Malaysia, to celebrate and highlight Truly Asia Malaysia. We have a great program ahead of us today. Before we get to that, just have a couple of housekeeping notes fairly quickly, just to get through. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Zoom, as you see at the bottom of your screen, there's two functions. You have your Q&A function and your chat function. Please use the chat function to engage with other participants. So say hello, introduce yourself, where you're from, where you work, and you can talk to other participants there. However, if you have a question, there is a Q&A function. Please submit your questions in the Q&A function and not using the chat function. Excuse me. So as I said, please use the Q&A function to submit questions to our panelists. If you submit any questions to the chat function, they probably will not be able to see that. And I'll just quickly now run through the agenda for us. So after my introductions, we'll have some opening remarks by IATA, some welcome remarks by Tourism Malaysia, and then we'll sit down with a fireside chat with Tourism Malaysia and BBC, and then that will be followed by our panel discussion on the courage to fly. With us, we have IATA and AAPA, or the Association of Asia Pacific Airlines. After the panel discussion, we'll wrap up. And I just wanted to mention this to you. After this forum session, we'll have a meet and greet with some of our speakers. Near the end of the session, we'll put the link in the chat so you can join that meet and greet. So some of the questions we weren't able to get to during the Q&A, maybe you can ask it to the speakers during the meet and greet that's happening after this particular session. So without further ado, we get to our opening remarks. And with that, I would like to invite PATA CEO, Dr. Mario Hardy, to say some opening remarks. Mario, over to you.
Thank you, Paul. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are around the world. Great pleasure to be with you today and welcome you to the Dream to Travel Festival under the theme of courage. Change is difficult. It takes tremendous courage to create something new or to disrupt the current status quo. It took tremendous courage for the Wright brothers to invent, build, and fly the world's first successful motor-operated airplane more than 100 years ago, ultimately transforming the travel and tourism industry. This week, we celebrate the courage that our members and partners and community embody with the innovation they've been created and the changes they are enacting. For us to move forward, for the industry to reopen and recover, we need to take some bold movements and innovations around the world in order to actually get us to fly again and travel. Throughout this month, PATA has organized the Dream to Travel Festival to inspire people to travel again, to get our community to engage, to learn, to share insights, so that we can actually all move forward as soon as we possibly can to actually make sure that we have a sustainable industry moving forward. I hope you enjoyed today's session. We have some great speakers with us, and I would look forward to actually listen to the conversation later on. Thank you very much. I hand over the microphone back to Paul. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario, for those words about today's session and about what we are doing here for today's forum. And with that, I would like to now invite to say some opening remarks the Director General of Tourism Malaysia, Mr. Datuk Musa Yusof. Datuk Musa, over to you.
Thank you, Paul. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you. First of all, it gave me a great honor to be here amongst our tourism fraternity today. Let me extend my warmest welcome to all of you for taking the time to join us as part of the Pacific Asia Travel Association, PATA, Dream to Travel Festival, which runs from 22nd of June until 17 July 2020. Before I begin, allow me to express my gratitude to PATA Secretariat, who have graciously extended the invitation to us at Tourism Malaysia to be one of the country hosts during these 4 weeks festivals. We applaud PATA's initiative to bring us together online for the first time amidst this challenging time, to give us an ideal platform as we engage and exchange ideas, celebrate the power of travel, and eventually find the courage to explore the world again. We are proud to feature Malaysia and have specially curated a program to showcase the best from our industry for a uniquely Malaysian experience throughout the Malaysian segment from 29 June until 3rd July. Ladies and gentlemen, we are all well aware that the tourism industry has been severely hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. Many countries have closed their international borders in a bid to curb the spread of the virus and reduce the rate of infection, including Malaysia. The uncertainty in both economy and in safety have raised concerns among the public and installed fear, especially in traveling. We are here today to address this. Malaysia is committed, and we stand by our fellow PATA members as we strive to reinvigorate the tourism industry. Through this online festival, we hope to learn, reconnect, and discuss on current issues as part of our recovery effort to boost promotions on tourism. It is undeniably that the pandemic has greatly affected our way of living. Despite the setbacks caused by the pandemic, we have had to rethink our ways not only to survive, but also have the courage to adapt to a new environment. Through all this, we have learned to be stronger and more resilient. In fact, many countries have shown great strides toward recovery as our frontliners demonstrate the extraordinary effort to ensure more people recover from the virus. The public too has played their part to adopt the necessary measures as prescribed by the authorities. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that many countries are now gearing towards reopening their tourism sector. In Malaysia, we are far from eliminating the virus altogether. We are happy with our progress as we managed to keep it under control. Due to the further reduction in COVID-19 cases in Malaysia, our government has given the green light for the domestic tourism to reopen, and we have seen the tourism sector coming to life again, slowly but steadily. As we adjust ourselves to the new normal and put in place the new SOPs to accommodate a post-COVID world, we hope to restore our tourism sector once again and look forward to welcoming you to Malaysia. Until then, we are happy to give you a sneak peek of what Malaysia has to offer virtually. Throughout this week, we have organized a series of activities to introduce you to some of the best offerings in Malaysia that you can look forward to. Yesterday, we had our live storytelling on underwater free diving experience at some of our Sinks Island. We hope that you were as mesmerized as we are by the clear blue waters of Malaysia, home to some of the top diving destinations in the world. Join us as we bring you more Malaysian experience to the rest of the week. 50 of our industry players, including tour agents, hotels, and product owners, have been invited to feature their products and services during the digital showroom session. For horror enthusiasts, stay tuned to our live storytelling tomorrow, where we highlight the dark tourism in Malaysia. We will explore the eerie Kelly's Castle, an unfinished mansion dating back to the early 1900s, and the Penang Ghost Museum, which offers a selection of the popular ghosts famous in Malaysian folklore. Malaysia boasts an array of mouth-watering fusion dishes that many tourists anticipate on their gastronomic adventures here. On Friday, we are proud to include a segment to showcase a culinary experience by one of our very own celebrity chefs, who will do a cooking demonstration of our local Malaysian dishes. We hope that you will take the opportunity to get to know Malaysia virtually through this platform and visit Malaysia once we reopen our borders again. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to conclude by expressing my thanks once again to PATA for their hard work in organizing this virtual event. Thank you, PATA, and all the team there, and all of you for joining us and supporting our effort to revitalize our tourism industry. I hope that we'll all have the courage to travel and explore the world safely soon. On behalf of my team at Tourism Malaysia and the Malaysian government and Ministry of Tourism, Arts and Culture, and my beloved country Malaysia, terima kasih and thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Musa. I think we'll be back with Dr. Musa in just a little bit for the fireside chat. Just wanted to remind, we just had some more people joining us. So I should remind you, everybody here, if you missed this part, we'll have a meet and greet session after this forum. We'll have the link in the chat towards the end. So you'll have a chance to actually speak with some of our speakers that have joined us. Maybe get some of the answers to the questions that we weren't able to get to. So please do join us for that. For all the calendar events, you can go to PATA Travel Forum. Sorry, PATA Go to our website. You can see the calendar of events for all the live experiences they'll be having this week. And just want to remind also that this current session is actually being streamed live on Facebook. And with that, I would like to then welcome Sharanjit Lay from BBC. She's a presenter at BBC World News. And welcome back with us at PATA. And I'll pass it over to you, Sharanjit.
Well, thank you so much for that, Paul. Just checking, as one often does with these new technological advances. Everyone is seeing and hearing me okay? Yeah. I believe Perfect. So. Fantastic. Great. Well, it's wonderful being here at PATA. I mean, it takes great courage for the travel industry to come together like this, I think, at a time like this. Obviously, with the BBC, we have had one key story that we have focused on for the last 3 or 4 months, and it has been the coronavirus pandemic. So the impact it's been having on economies around the world and industries around the world has been immense, and none more so than the tourism industry, of course. And I was very gratified to hear those comments from Datuk Musa. Selamat pagi, kawan-kawan di Malaysia. I'm actually half Malaysian. I don't know if that's a secret that's widely known, but my mother was born there. So ibu saya dari Bandar Ipoh yang indah. And Malaysia, I have to say, is one of my favorite places to visit. It is right across the border from Singapore. It is easy to get to. And at this moment, I fear that me and many other Singaporeans, the ability to be able to travel there, of course, like everyone else, is non-existent. So my first question to you, Datuk Musa, would be, you know, when does Malaysia plan to open its borders to travelers from overseas?
Again, sorry. Again, your question.
Well, my question would be, when can I travel to Malaysia again? I think myself and many other Singaporeans would love to come and visit. And so we just love some clarity as to when you're opening up to Singaporeans and to the rest of the world.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Sharanjit, for the time. Actually, we are eagerly waiting for our neighboring countries to come into Malaysia. As you can see in the medias that we reported, the government now is talking to the Singapore government as well to open up. Since you are there, hopefully soon we can hear the announcement. And we are talking about the tourism corridors as well as the travel bubbles between the ASEAN countries that has been identified. We put forward the proposal to the government, and the Ministry of Health, they're already in discussion, and they will let us know, and they will announce it soon, hopefully.
All right. So obviously much depends on just how bad this pandemic gets. And of course, there's lots of worries now about second waves. So is there a fear when you're looking into Malaysian policy? Do you factor in this fear of a second wave? Are you waiting to see what perhaps other countries in ASEAN are doing before opening up? What is the criteria you're looking at the moment?
Well, we are very much stand guided by the National Safety Council, as well as the Ministry of Health on this. And as you can see, even we are looking at Malaysia as a venue for the traffic to come in. And what the effort that we are doing now is basically make sure there's no increase in terms of COVID-19 cases among Malaysians, especially. And from that, we already open up the borders between states. We are looking into, I think most countries now looking at domestic tourism as one of the things that we are looking at. And we are standing guided by that. And out of this discussion, I can openly mention it to you that we are discussing with several ASEAN countries, namely cross-border tourism, for example, such as Singapore, Brunei, and Thailand. These are we have a cross-border tourism with these countries, as well as Indonesia. So we are looking into the progress, and through that, our Foreign Affairs will communicate with the Foreign Affairs, as well as Ministry of Health to Ministry of Health. And once they give the thumbs up, we are looking into getting the traffic coming in, but still standard to the SOPs, and maybe not. We can also perceive the numbers coming into Malaysia also will gradually. It is not open up, everybody will come out, but there'll be numbers will come in gradually. And the most important thing is to restore people confidence to travel.
Yeah, I mean, restoring confidence is a tough thing, isn't it? Because people are scared. Obviously, there's been a huge rise in the pandemic in countries like the US. Interesting you mentioned them. But how can you reassure travelers going to Malaysia, for instance, that they will be able to arrive safely? So how do you ensure a safe travel into Malaysia once, of course, it does open up to foreign travelers?
Okay, I think when it comes to COVID-19, all ministries involved, for example, not only Ministry of Tourism, Ministry of Transport will ensure that, for example, connectivity in terms of airlines, there are certain protocols need to be adhered to. And I think the airlines, they're well equipped with that. I think later on, maybe Mr. Vinup can also mention about it. On that, and then we have also the Foreign Affairs to communicate with the rest, and even Tourism Malaysia, through our 33 officers overseas, we constantly communicated with the medias overseas, as well as the tour industry or tour operators overseas. They're already in contact with us to almost daily that we highlight to them what's happening in Malaysia. And in a way, we have to mention it here for record that even our Director General of Health been nominated by the media that one of the top 3 doctors in term of handling this COVID-19, and we're very transparent into it and all the protocol that we have done. And in Malaysia, within Malaysia, we have also protocol done by each state. So it is not only on the federal part, but it trickle down all the way to the state as well as to the district to ensure all these no COVID-19 transmitted in between. And the protocols in eateries, the protocol in theme parks, all sort of so many protocols in certain areas. For example, if you're coming into a mall, for example, mall already opens in Malaysia. If there's about 150 shops there, each shop, if you enter, you also have to have all the protocols into that. But these are the things that we'll be doing, and I think people will confidence on that. And we have to ensure Malaysian to be confident about it first. That's why we can see now, once Malaysian themselves moving out. And one thing that we mentioned to fellow Malaysian, you are the one to ensure that all the protocols, and you are the one, you cannot depend on Ministry of Health to make sure everything is in order. The people of Malaysia must make sure COVID-19, there's no COVID-19 within that. So adhere to the guidelines, whatever thing that we mentioned to them. And through media, we did mention all this, therefore the Malaysian would adhere to that. And with the Malaysian traveling within Malaysia, then you can see the international have the confidence to come in. So we are doing that, and through social media as well, we're putting up a lot of a teaser. For example, Dream Now, Travel Letter, all this kind of thing that we're putting in order to entice them to come to Malaysia.
All right. Well, that's very reassuring that you are making all those steps and taking those protocols. But I guess, just an idea of what some of those protocols entail. Would it be temperature screenings, testing at the border? What exactly is Malaysia putting into place right now that perhaps the rest of the region can look at and try to emulate?
Okay. All right. The one thing that we do is that we have the apps ready at all these places as you're coming in. And with the smartphone, first you have to scan the QR code. Immediately you can, once you register, your name and your phone number will be entered too. And you can also, once you get your temperature also can be into that. And it is basically just contact tracing method. Another thing, within the area, there'll be social distance, need to adhere to at least 1 meter. And we are out in places, mask, we have to wear mask. And of course, washing your hand, regularly. And of course, we did mention also, for example, kids, family with children, to avoid going into enclosed area. So they can be in the open area. And this is where then all this protocol, and then some of those protocols, for example, hotels, they are putting up other protocols on top of these protocols to ensure that everything's, to boost up the confidence of people. And even in Malaysia, the Malaysian Association of Hotels, doing a certification currently, they are the final stage in order for them to certify the hotels among them. Don't adhere to the protocols, and I think you can know the standard of international hotel and to boost the confidence for everybody, even with fellow Malaysian. And we can see from this there'll be a demand later on, not so much of congregation of groups coming in, but there'll be more traveling with families and friends. So we are looking at for the tour operators and even the Malaysian industry to adhere to some of these new norms.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's a term that we keep hearing about, the new normal, not just something Malaysia is having to deal with, but of course the rest of the world as we all deal with this pandemic. So tell us a little bit about the tourism industry itself. I know we met some years ago at another similar event and we talked about it then. Of course, at the time it was booming. How long do you think, as somebody who's been in the industry for so long, who's overseen the industry for so long, how long do you think it will take for it to recover fully? Will it ever recover from this?
Okay, on our side, we did some simulation as well as some study on this. We are looking at from when COVID started until end of September, there'll be a need for a strong PR exercise to boost the confidence of people to travel. And we are looking at, for Malaysia, I'm talking about Malaysia, we are looking at the 4th quarter of this year to basically to see some of these traffics coming in. But when I mentioned about the corridor earlier, we are looking at Malaysia and Singapore, Malaysia, Brunei, Malaysia, Thailand, hopefully within July or August. So we are ready with that. We are communicating with our partners in Singapore as well as Brunei, and we do not want there's a lag between once the borders opening up, then we start to thinking how to go about. But we got to make sure everything's ready in place, and by the time it's open, then we come up. Because when it comes to Singapore, actually, there are two. Once I think the government is looking into, there's a lot of, we have about 250,000 Malaysians working in Singapore and they commute daily. And that's for both sides, there's economy on both sides. And there are a lot of also Singaporean coming into Malaysia because the factories, things like that in Malaysia. So we're looking into the economic side, then followed by the leisure part. So these are the things that we are doing. And as well as Brunei, Brunei, our fellow friends there, now they can having a very, they can just come into Malaysia now with one of the longest bridge in Southeast Asia, crossing the Brunei Bay. Previously about 2.5 hours trip, now only 40 minutes trip. So we are welcoming to the other part of Brunei. So we are looking into this and we are discussing with the operators. And of course, we need to boost the confidence. and we ensure that all protocols being adhered by all the tour operators, by all the hotel, by all the eateries, by everybody. Therefore, we shouldn't have any issues on that, and hopefully we can, because tourism, people travel with both countries. So for us to support our fellow neighbors, as well as our fellow neighbors to support us. So we are looking at to move in by the fourth quarter of this year that we can see other traffic coming in.
Well, July, you said, or August, that's amazing. I mean, July is literally tomorrow. It seems very, very soon.
Yeah.
I guess we're running out of time. I know we have about 10 minutes of this fireside chat, but I wanted to ask a final question. I mean, what's it been like for you personally as somebody who has to take charge of an industry that is so important to a country like Malaysia, the tourism industry? What has this pandemic been like to you personally? And are you finding that you're reaching out to many of your counterparts in the region, to other tourism heads, to try to find out what they're doing so that you can all collectively come together to recover from this?
Well, personally, this is something, of course, we earlier part of when COVID or coronavirus, that time we call it not even COVID-19, our team, we were thinking about SARS, how we handle SARS in 2003. But this is even worse than SARS. Actually, Sanjit, what we have done actually, during ASEAN Tourism Forum, early part of January, we were there in Brunei. And at that time, coronavirus or COVID-19 is still in China. We already outlined what are the things need to be done. And one of the things that we want to do is, number one, is domestic tourism. Secondly, we are going into ASEAN and some other market as well. However, when people-to-people transmission already occurred in neighboring countries like Singapore and then into Malaysia, and it become declared as a pandemic, then the whole thing changed, the whole scenario. And the best part, I got also somebody asked me a question, a reporter asking me, Dato, did you manage to sleep at night due to this COVID-19? So I said, of course, we have to sleep. But anyway, it made us, the whole industry actually, get together as early part as January actually, when COVID is still in China. We got about 6, what we call it, Tourism Recovery Action Committee meeting with all the industries, the association. We set down what are the things that we can. And as you can see, as early as 27th of February, the government already announced the first stimulus to the fellow hotel industry, tourism industry, amounting for 30 million ringgit as early as 27th of February. So these are the and then after that we have a stimulus 2, stimulus 3, and all those things. And basically we are looking into one for the industry, another one not only tourism industry but the whole broad spectrum, as well as to the people of Malaysia, because some of them they already start, some of those they cannot be, they lose their job and things like that. But on our side, we managed to work things out with them in order to make them still moving. And we are going on with them. And at the same time, whatever thing they put forward to the Ministry of Tourism, we bring those back to the National Security Council as well as Ministry of Health. We put it and we gather with the industry to come up with all the protocol. And like I said, as of yesterday, we are so happy hearing that, okay, now theme parks already open up. Theme park, the investments in billions of dollars or multi-million dollars investment. So we already open up the dry park and also the water theme park. And even my sector, the business sector now, earlier part was only limited to 10 or 15 people. Now we allow us 250 people. So we can already get companies to have incentive, things like within Malaysia first. Then later on, we will start opening up. And
okay,
I hope to answer your question, I still sleep, and the whole team, I think they are ready to rumble and to make sure everything in order. And we already having this constant communication with our counterpart overseas through our station overseas as well.
All right. Well, terima kasih, Dato' Musa. That was excellent. That was a wonderful 10-minute fireside chat, we were told. I hope we stuck to time. And I believe we have our panel session next, but I'm told we have a 2-minute break before we get to that, because we need to let all the attendees obviously compose themselves. So I will let Paul take over at the moment. Paul, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. So thank you very much, Sharonjit. Sharonjit, just a quick question. Can you see the Q&A? Is it feasible, or do I need to feature the questions later?
I can see the Q&A, and I noticed that we've got some great questions. So I'm very eager to ask those questions. So thank you, participants watching, for those questions. Please keep them coming in, because we're keen to ask our panelists who will be joining us shortly on the next session, which is all about the courage to fly.
Perfect,
And,
perfect. Yeah.
As soon as those panelists are ready, we can get going.
Okay, well, yeah, I guess the panelists can then just, whenever they're all ready, they can turn their cameras and their audio and visual on, if they're ready. And then I guess Sharonjit can introduce them, and I will step away, and maybe you can just, ask everyone to introduce themselves, and hopefully that will give enough time for all the other panelists to make sure that they're up and running. All right, so back over to you, Sharonjit.
All right, fantastic. Thank you, Paul. So yes, we're waiting for our panelists. We have some amazing panelists speaking to us today. Again, we'll be hearing from the Malaysian Tourism Board with Mr. Zulkifli Mohammed Said, the Deputy Director General there. He'll be joining us. We have Vinup Dole, the Regional Director for IATA, that's the International Air Transport Association. And we also have Beatrice Lim, who's Director of Industry and Regulatory Affairs from the Association of Asia Pacific Airlines. So as soon as they are all ready, can I get you all to turn your videos and your microphones on? And we can get started. We've got lots of great questions from the audience watching. So as I mentioned, please keep those questions coming in.
Looks like you're all good there, Sharonjit.
Wonderful. Okay, well, good morning to all of you. Selamat pagi again. I do love using my limited bahasa skills when it comes to Malaysia. But yes, I mean, first of all, this is such an unprecedented time for the industry, as we keep hearing, and particularly for airlines. So I'm conscious of the fact that two of you represent the airline industry. So give us a sense, as an opening remark, just a brief opener, about how each of you are seeing this pandemic impact your industry right now. Let's start with Beatrice.
Yeah, thanks, Sharonjit. I represent the Association of Asia Pacific Airlines, and we're a trade association representing international scheduled carriers based in the Asia Pacific region. So our focus is not just internationally, but obviously a big part of it is the Asia Pacific region, which is a big part of the business for our carriers. Obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic is an unprecedented crisis. I think the greatest challenge that this industry has ever faced. And just in a span of weeks, we've seen traffic plummet from airports that were brimming full with capacity to now to a mere trickle of passengers. And the situation obviously isn't helped by various governments with imposing border restrictions, and not just international border restrictions, but also interstate travel. That's something that we've really had a lot of difficulty as an industry to cope with, as well as the fact that, the wider economic effects of this, because as everyone recognizes, aviation is a great generator for social and economic development, and people want to fly. And I think the problem with how this pandemic has practically not just decimated international travel, but also, the wider effects of people losing their jobs, people who work in the tourism industry, people who even just normal business travel, all that's pretty much dried up. We recognize the grave health issues, and we're very optimistic about many governments who are who are slowly getting the situation contained within their borders. But I think for the economy to really work again globally, and you know, the economy is such a globally connected sector, and it's so intertwined with people's lives, and cross-border travel as well. What we're hoping for is that governments will implement, a set of harmonized measures in accordance with the recommendations issued by the ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, what we call the CART recommendations, and hopefully pave the way for the industry to restart again, and also for large sections of the global economy to start again.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Beatrice. Hopefully we'll get to some of those points that you bring up, the harmonization, some of these policies by government. But let's hear from Vinook next about how you think this pandemic has impacted the industry from IATA's viewpoint. And I know IATA has put out lots of, statistics just showing the staggering amount that has been lost to the industry.
Yeah, so thanks, Shanjit, for that. And to add on to what Beatrice said, this is unprecedented for our industry. And case in point is last month or a couple of months ago, air traffic was down 95% from what it was, say, last year. In normal times, in Asia Pacific, we were talking about doubling of traffic over the next 20 years, or maybe tripling of traffic over the next 20 years. And now we are talking about, okay, what will be the outlook for the whole year? And our estimate for the whole year is that traffic, on an average for the full year will be about 50% of what it was. Airlines, as you very well know, run on razor thin margins. And with traffic at that level, we are, forecasting a loss of in excess of about $84 billion. So it's devastating for our industry. Recovery also. So we are talking about recovery later this year and domestic markets and some regional markets. But the best case estimates also look at, the traffic would recover somewhere around 75% to what it was by next year. A large part, so we look at the financial loss for the industry, and I think Beatrice talked about employment, but there's a wider impact on the economy, and tourism is one of those. Now, if we look at what can we do to bring this industry together, what we are finding is it's not only about airlines saying that it's safe to travel. And, airlines need to, first of all, be ready to fly their planes, to fly passengers. But we need confidence among the passengers. We need to build confidence among the passengers that they feel safe to fly. But then we also need to build confidence among governments and authorities that it is safe to let their own citizens fly to a second country. And more importantly, it's safe for them to accept passengers from A, B, or C countries. So in order to do that, you have to address the problems through a variety of different ways. You have to build confidence in the passengers by educating them, say that the air on the aircraft is probably better than the air in your own home, but also talk about what measures the airlines are taking, what measures the passengers should take, right down to making sure that everyone washes hands and wears a mask on board. So there are a few different things to happen that are needed. And we need the industry and government to come together. And it's not only Ministry of Transport, but it's a foreign ministry, and more the Ministry of Health, who are playing a key role in the opening of economies. So we need everyone to come together, and it's forums like this that help educate people, help educate the decision makers, and build confidence among the decision makers and hopefully among the passengers. So we are approaching this. I think Beatrice mentioned the ICAO card process, which is basically a set of guidelines. So we are hoping all the countries adopt those guidelines so that when they open borders on a bilateral basis initially, they know exactly what the guidelines are in the other country. So when Dato mentioned about opening up travel with Brunei, Singapore, or Thailand, we know exactly what those measures are, and they can recognize each other's measures and then open it up more broadly on a regional basis, say it's ASEAN and then Asia Pacific. But we also, at the same time, need to make sure that the industry is doing its own part. Airlines, first, safety is the number one priority. So make sure that the system is ready to start, but then also make sure that we are communicating enough and showcasing to our passengers that it's okay to travel. So lots of work ahead, and hopefully we get you to Malaysia and within the next month or so, if I can say that.
Excellent. Well, that brings us very nicely to Zulkifli, who represents one of those ministries you mentioned. Of course, you've got Ministry of Tourism, Tourism Malaysia. We just heard from Datuk Musa about the steps that Malaysia is making. So, Zulkifli, could you give us a sense of, just how you see this pandemic? Just some quick opening remarks about how it's impacted your industry.
Thank you, Sharanjit. Good morning to you, Paul, Mario in Bangkok, and also all listeners in Malaysia as well as those overseas. Well, everybody has mentioned that this pandemic is very much unprecedented. It is different from the previous crises that we went through, the HARS, the SARS, the haze, the Koksaki, and all the other tsunami and so forth. It has affected all businesses, big and small. And recently, our Honorable Minister mentioned up to today, 45 billion ringgit loss was recorded in the industry. It covers all sectors, hotel, airlines, F&B, transportation, and so forth. And it has also affected the organizing of events, international events in particular, that was planned for the Visit Year campaign. And of course, the big impact it has is the cancellation of the Visit Year 2020 campaign. And certainly, Tourism Malaysia, beginning of the year, we have embarked on several initiatives locally as well as in various overseas markets for this Visit Year campaign. And now most of it has to be either deferred or cancelled. And we are now regrouping and focusing. Number one, firstly, is on domestic travel, where the government has announced from the 10th of June, interstate travel is allowed. And various businesses is slowly but gradually allowed to be open, as mentioned by Datuk Musa just now. The theme parks, the water-based as well as the dry theme park is now allowed to be in operation. And 1st July, the spa is also now looked at to be allowed to be open. So slowly but gradually, domestic tourism is coming back. And now everyone is eagerly, especially those in the tourism industry of the country, is eagerly waiting for international borders to be open so that we can, welcome our international tourists to come to Malaysia. And of course, you, Sharanjit, coming back to Ipoh, enjoying all.
Absolutely. Yes, especially all the makanan sedap, nasi lemak, and all the others. I love Malaysian food, anything spicy. But I've just taken a look at some of the great questions that have been coming in from everyone and the participants. So thank you for those questions, and please keep them coming in. There's one question from Helen Erickson, which talks about air bubbles. Air bubbles, the notion that you can open up to a particular market and which markets you're looking to open up first. And obviously, Zulkifli and Datuk Musa have mentioned that obviously you're looking at ASEAN markets first, whether it's Singapore, Brunei, and others. But let's just explore the whole notion of air bubbles, you know, green lanes, these air corridors. First of all, tell us a little bit about how you see them working, because it just seems so incredibly complex that governments need to sort of take steps to open up. And it's a step-by-step basis depending on which country it is. So tell us a little bit about that, how it's impacting your industries. So if anybody wants to jump in,
Yeah, maybe I can, if you don't mind,
okay,
I can.
please. Go ahead.
Currently, as we speak, our Director General of the Department of Health is having talks with 6 countries to look at the possibility of creating these air bubbles or these travel bubbles that has been mentioned several times. In ASEAN, it's Brunei and Singapore. And out of ASEAN, it's Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and Korea. But as much as everyone would like to get excited about these travel bubbles, we need to realize that there will definitely be conditions imposed, not just by the receiving country, but also by the countries that will be sending or allowing their citizens to travel to a second country, as you know, Binod was hoping just now. So definitely health as well as safety protocols will be in place. The standard operating procedure, the visa applications, the COVID screening tests, and so forth. And yesterday we heard news, unofficial, that Singapore, if they do decide these travel bubbles, it seems that they are looking to cap at 400 travelers a week. And that is only applied to Singaporean citizens. But of course, we are also looking at the expatriates in Singapore as well to be allowed to travel, because they also make their way to Malaysia for many R&R, social, and so forth. But even this, if it's true, capping at 400, who are these people that will be allowed to travel? Are they business travelers? Are they medical travelers only? Are they students or people that would like to visit their sick ones in Malaysia or something like that? So all this will need to be, you know, decided by the relevant authorities. But we in Malaysia, as far as Tourism Malaysia is concerned, we are looking at getting as many of our foreign guest citizens from these 6 countries, if they do materialize, for tourism purposes, which indirectly will help the travel industry in Malaysia.
Okay, thank you, Zulkifli. Beatrice and Vinop, I'm interested to hear how these air corridors will impact the aviation industry specifically.
So if I may just respond to that. So yes, there is a lot of talk on travel bubbles. So we need to look at there are a few different ways of looking at it. One is, obviously, we don't want aviation to spread the virus, right? That is almost your number one condition. And that's where we need to make sure that the country, the airline, the airport, they have put in place enough measures, checks and balances, and to ensure that people who get on the aircraft, you have tried to screen as many people as possible, and on the aircraft, they don't spread the virus. But then when they arrive, today what is happening is a number of countries, actually travel is open to quite a few destinations. It's just that when you arrive, you are stuck with a 2-week quarantine. And what passengers are telling us is that if they have to go through a 2-week quarantine, they would rather not travel. You can understand why it does not work for business or for tourism, a 2-week quarantine, unless you're quarantined in a fancy resort, but even that won't cut it, right? So, so the replacement for quarantine is, of course, some level, a combination of testing. It's also a combination of contact tracing, and also measures at the destination country. So I think it's those measures that once are implemented, then you can talk about a travel bubble. And yes, I can understand, you know, there was the comment about 400 passenger limit per week. That is a drop in the ocean, if you may call it, compared to what travel is on a normal week between Singapore and, say, Malaysia. There was a comment about 250,000 workers or people who travel across the borders for work every day. So obviously 400 per week is not going to cut it, but it is a step in the right direction, and it can be a good first step, and we hope these are expanded and multiple travel bubbles are created. But yes, a travel bubble needs to make sure that there is no quarantine, but is replaced by a combination of other measures that can involve testing. And if we talk about testing, and just one last point, is that today Singapore and China have a travel bubble, which is limited to business travel. You do have to apply and get approval, but then you need testing before you depart, say, Singapore. You need testing on arrival in China. You need testing before departing back from China, and then arrival in Singapore. Each one of these tests can be about $200, for example. So you're talking about $800 in testing. That can kill tourism. That is also not a cost that can support business in the long run, right? And so what we are saying is that, yes, testing can be part of the solution, but then the testing needs to be fast. You can't spend 1 hour or 2 hours at the airport having a test and then waiting for the test results. It should be scalable. We hope to have billions of passengers in the air soon. So you need to have the capacity to do many more tests, and these tests need to be accurate. What would be a disaster is if you have a test, but then there are false positives and vice versa, because then it does not address the problem. And we are seeing reports in many countries where the tests have turned out to be unreliable. So lots of work to do to ensure that, yes, testing can be an alternative to quarantine to allow for travel bubbles.
All right, but well, Beatrice, I'm sure you've been waiting patiently to respond to some of these, and I mean, lots of great questions, lots of great points. I mean, there's so many layers of things that policymakers have to look at, your industry has to look at. I mean, what do you think is one of the chief things when it comes to something like travel bubbles? I mean, is this the only way we can start to open up? Are there any other solutions?
Well, the concept of travel bubbles and green corridors, again, it's, we're glad that these discussions are actually taking place. However, right now, if you're talking about a common regional or a common multilateral international solution to lifting the borders, I think we're very far away from that. What we've noticed is that governments tend very much to be focused on bilateral deals. And, if you think about it, sure, we talk about the Singapore-China deal and we talk about the Australia-New Zealand bubble, all of which are good concepts to have and a step in the right direction. But when you look at the requirements and the conditions that have been put in place to implement and to ensure that they can be used, the conditions tend to be very onerous. Which, Vanup has already mentioned, between testing on both sides to, various other conditions such as restrictions on the itinerary you can follow once you arrive at the country of destination, as well as, say, for example, in the Singapore-China deal, the traveler is prohibited from using public transport. I mean, we understand all the public health concerns behind that. But really, if every bilateral deal comes up with different conditions, both prior to getting on the plane and after arrival, then you're going to be stuck with a proliferation of different requirements. And even as airlines, we have to kind of figure out, right, what's the nationality of the traveler? Where is he going? What do we have to ensure, needs to be carried out? And when we pick the passenger up from the other end to return, what are the conditions in place? So if you imagine this taking place in, over multiple destinations, it becomes very, very difficult and complicated, not just for the airlines, but also for the traveler. If you're limiting numbers of travelers to say, 400 passengers or whatever, and even then, that's just a mere trickle of the thousands that travel by air, traveled by air before the pandemic. What's being put in place now is simply not scalable, to when air travel recovers again. As Vinu's mentioned, you may be able, testing will probably, as we see it, be a part of it going forward. But then, you have to ensure that there are sufficient test kits. You have to ensure that the quality of the test kits are good. You also have to ensure that the travelers can be processed very quickly when they go through the airports. And the other question obviously is, where is the testing going to take place? There are now ongoing discussions as to whether the testing can take place at the airports. And obviously that will involve, a whole load of discussion about whether the capacity of the airport and whether there are dedicated facilities that can, process hundreds or even thousands of passengers at a time, and the time that's taken. And when you look at some of the conditions that have imposed, I think even for business travelers, it would be very difficult, not just from the cost angle, but also for business travelers, if you have to go from one place to another and then be held up for, even in a Vasquez case, 48 hours before you can go for your business meetings. And then you travel back to your home base and then be told that you have to stay at home for 14 days. I think you'll find a case of many companies saying, maybe not, So I think there's got to be a better solution going forward with, various measures in place that can kind of allow people, both governments and the traveling public, to reach a certain level of confidence where they say, well, okay, we can continue to conduct business because as this prolongs, you will see, detrimental effects, both economically and socially, if these exchanges aren't allowed. And ICAO has, the CART recommendations and the CART guidelines are very comprehensive. And if governments were all to adopt them uniformly, and there's some sort of harmonization and trust created amongst governments, particularly amongst economies that are more or less at the same level of containment, then that would be a good way going forward to lift the borders again. Ironically, although Asia was the first region to be hit by the pandemic, we were actually hoping that in Asia we'd start seeing the lifting of borders because Asian countries had a head start in trying to contain the pandemic. But instead, we're not really seeing that within the region. The irony is that, as some of the governments, the states that are more effective in containing it are probably the most conservative when it comes to thinking about lifting border restrictions again. And instead, we're seeing, countries in Europe, the EU, for example, take that bigger step forward and taking more ambitious steps to reopen the borders again.
All right, well, thank you, Beatrice. I'm conscious of time. I think we only have about 10 more minutes in this discussion, sadly. I've got some great questions again, and one question here. I guess it relates somewhat to the idea that, both Vinu and Beatrice, you both talked about the ICAO CART recommendations. These recommendations by, an international organization that should really be implemented globally. I mean, that's what you're recommending. A question from Peggy Ang, which I guess relates to that, and she's asked about common SOPs that can be used region-wide that perhaps might be expanded globally. I mean, what are some of these standards? And again, you can draw on the ICAO CART standards and tell us a little bit more about it. Is that what's required now? Some sort of a global effort, region-wide effort, where governments, policymakers can come together, come up with a set of standards and be able to implement it globally. And if not, why aren't they being implemented globally if these are a good set of standards?
So if I may, so I think you're exactly right. Global standards are needed when we talk about aviation or tourism, which are both very global in nature, right? Obviously, it's not such an issue when you're talking about domestic tourism, but then again, in some countries, we have seen some state governors implementing procedures that inhibit even interstate tourism, right? So that is why it is quite important for international bodies to come together and develop standards that allow for cross-border travel and cross-border tourism. The ICAO card is exactly that. It has come up with broad recommendations in terms of what should be done at airports, what should be done with aircraft, what should be done with cargo, and how should passengers be handled. Now, what ICAO has done, it's done an excellent job, and yeah, IATA was also involved in that process. But then what we have done in IATA is we have also developed a set of guidelines or implementation handbooks that help airlines, airports, and other stakeholders to implement the CART guidelines, because the guidelines and recommendations are exactly that. But then we go down to more into the nitty-gritty of how does an airline or an airport then implement those guidelines. Now, it is aviation specific, but a lot of it can be extended to other parts of the travel chain. And I think some more work to say, if you have done testing at the airport, that should be, say, recognized by a hotel, and you should be, so maybe there's work by national bodies like WTTC and PATA, which is this forum, to enable that sharing of information and best practices, so that there is a global view on what is the right thing going ahead.
All right, thank you, Vinod. But at this point, I would like to bring in Zulkifli again for the Malaysian perspective. I mean, is Malaysia exploring these global standards, and how are they trying to sign on to them?
Well, there are minimum requirements already imposed by the Ministry of Health and the National Security Council for businesses in Malaysia. The hand sanitizers, the temperature reading, the wearing of facial masks, social distancing, and several other requirements which they need to adhere to before their business is allowed. Now, talking about international travelers, that it will be a totally different requirement here. There are talks about the COVID screening, health certificates, either imposed by the country, the government of the country, that will allow their citizens to travel, as well as this health certificate issued by the country that will be sending their people out, will be recognized or received by the receiving country. So, for example, let's say Singapore were to allow their citizens to come to Malaysia, there will certainly be requirement perhaps for the health screening, and will Malaysia authorities be receiving or recognizing this health certificate. That goes for all the other countries as well. So these are the things that they are talking about. And of course, there is also this thing about who will be having to pay for this health screening. You see, that's another issue. I don't know whether governments will have enough funds to be, funding all this for all travelers. So that will be another issue that will be discussed. But at the end of the day, whatever SOP is being introduced, the topic of our discussion today is courage. Or rather, the main word here is courage. So courage here, I think, is not only just for the traveler or the businesses, but the government themselves, all governments of the world will need to have the courage to what we call this, sit down together, have mutual agreement in terms of what are the standard operating procedures in terms of health screening and safety protocol that will need to be imposed on travelers before they can allow the what we call this, the outbound or inbound travel, as well as the opening of international borders. So everyone, of course, in the industry is eagerly waiting. They want this tourism to be revived, international or domestic airlines, even cruise liners, cruise operators, and so forth. But let's not forget, the vaccine for COVID-19 has not been discovered yet. Medical professionals around the world has mentioned that will take quite a while before any kind of vaccine is discovered. And of course, the last thing we want is a second, third, fourth wave of COVID cases to be appearing here and there, which will put a dent on whatever effort by either the government or the non-government bodies to encourage any kind of travel to help the businesses involved in the tourism industry that has been badly affected by this COVID-19 pandemic.
Terima kasih. Thank you, Zulkifli. That was great points. I loved your point about having courage, how governments need to have that courage too. We all need to have that courage. And that brings me to my next point, which is, again, one of the great questions that we've been getting. And thank you all for your questions. I don't think we'll be able to get to all of them because the session is ending fairly soon. But a question from Bob Valerio about the stimulus measures. And we heard a little bit mentioned earlier about some of the stimulus measures Malaysia has taken. But again, governments have also implemented stimulus measures and support for the airline industry. We've seen Cathay Pacific, Singapore Airlines through Temasek. A lot of the regional carriers are getting government support at this time because they're it's been a terrible time for the industry, as we know from Winop and Lutris. So tell us, how necessary is this support now from governments? Do governments have to be even more courageous to even implement more stimulus to help support sectors like aviation and tourism? And I'll let anyone jump in at this stage.
Maybe let me just try to attempt this. Of course, in times of crisis, in times of trouble, everyone turn to the government. But everyone will have a role to be played at the same time, government or non-government. In the case of Malaysia, as mentioned earlier by DG Datuk Musa, several incentives and as well as stimulus package has been decided and approved by the cabinet. Some incentives such as tariffs on electricity, taxes and income tax, corporate tax, and so forth. And for the travel industry, a budget of 30 million Malaysian ringgit here is being discussed to stimulate domestic travel. And also at the same time, we are talking about also some budget to also help with the international promotion. But I think the most important here is how to, be fairly disseminating whatever stimulus package that is being approved by the government. we have had video conferencing with 12 local travel associations, including Malaysian home-based carriers, and also product owners and so forth. So there's a host of business sectors across the board here in tourism that the government is looking at to help. But of course, we can't help everybody with the same amount of what we call this financial assistance here. We try to cover as much as possible. And the main focus now is at the moment to stimulate and invigorate domestic travel. And at the same time, looking at regional travel within ASEAN, the countries where the DG of Health is currently having talks, and to a certain extent, perhaps towards the end of the year or from the first quarter next year, to look at the mid and the long haul markets. And having said that, it is also important that we need to ensure our carrier, not just our home-based carriers, but also the international carriers that are flying into KLIA and other international airports in Malaysia will recover fast in terms of their internal operation, so that they can start bringing in these international travelers to the various destinations here in Malaysia.
Okay, terima kasih. Well, let's hear from the aviation representatives now, because we know for support for airlines, it's been very sporadic in the region. Thailand, for instance, has not supported its airline. It said it needs a rehabilitation plan instead. But you've seen some support. So what would you recommend? Is this something governments need to be looking into to try to support their national carriers?
So if I may, so yes, you're right. We have the support for airlines has been sporadic, and we have unfortunately seen a few of the airlines that have had to either go into bankruptcy protection or similar measures. And we recently saw the news of say Knox Scoot being liquidated. So it is a tough time, and we did go out to governments at the start of the crisis, and we said, look, understanding and taking into account the economic impact of aviation, we need to make sure that we try and preserve aviation, both domestic and international. And some governments responded by providing assistance to airports and airlines and other stakeholders like ground handlers. But the crisis has turned out to be something that no one expected we would still be talking about it 3 months, 4 months down the line, and we are almost in July. And as Mr. Said just mentioned, we may not see international traffic recover before next year. And so we are telling the governments that you need to do more. We understand that the governments have a number of priorities. They have to make sure that the citizens, and many of them unfortunately are being impacted because of the economic downturn itself. So we have to make the case why aviation is important. Why is tourism important? Why is travel important? And because aviation, tourism, travel, they can all be the catalyst for the economic recovery of that region and the country. Also, there is a case to be made that it's better to support and ensure the survival of the various bodies involved in travel and tourism today, than to lose them and lose all the expertise and lose all the know-how and the systems and processes, and then having to recreate them down the line. It will be a much longer, painful, and a much more expensive process to do that. But we fully understand that governments are hard-pressed for cash today, many of them, and they have competing priorities. They have to make sure that, first of all, healthcare is taken care of. There are factories that are competing for the same amount of stimulus. So, but yes, governments do have a role to play. and we say that whatever they can do to ensure the survival of not only the entities but the staff, the employment that is there around the aviation and the broader travel and tourism ecosystem, that needs to be retained and maintained as long as possible.
Excellent. Beatrice, I'm sure you've got some points there.
Yeah, I think some of the rescue packages that we've been seeing are obviously welcome, and to me are a recognition of the importance of the aviation industry to the overall economy, particularly countries and economies that are very externally focused, trade-wise, business links-wise. So it's a welcome gesture from governments, and we've also seen some high-profile failures, sadly along the way, and I think that can't be avoided, and restructuring as well. And we fully recognize as an industry that we're not the only sector that's suffering. And as Vinod mentioned, governments have other priorities, but where aviation is concerned, in Asia in particular, I think Asian governments get the point and get the story that of the importance of aviation to the overall economy as a generator of GDP, and also contribution to social and economic development, and the importance of the tourism sectors. And this is why I think we've seen some firm expressions of support. But as the pandemic becomes prolonged, it obviously is taking its toll continue to take its toll on the airline industry and the tourism industry as well. I mean, for us as airlines, we don't like seeing planes parked in the desert. We don't like to see, employees being asked to perform other tasks or being furloughed. Nobody likes that. But the truth is that, as the pandemic and the crisis is prolonged, we're beginning to see some of this. So yes, government support in various forms is very important. But very importantly, on the travel restriction front, we think that if they can all get their act together and come up to some sort of a harmonized platform where there was mutual trust, and with the necessary safeguard measures in place, then obviously airlines would very much like to be able to operate commercially as normal business entities again. But the crisis going forward is not just obviously about the airline and the tourism industry. It's also about people's lives and people's livelihoods. Families who have been separated because of, border restrictions, people who have lost their jobs and who are maybe stranded in various places, unable to get home because there are no air services or because there are border restrictions in place. And that's something that needs to go hand in hand. When we're talking about support from the governments, there needs to be support on all fronts to help the industry and to help tourism take off again.
Yeah, I mean, all really valid points. And that's the thing, really, ultimately, it comes down to this pandemic, just how long it will last, whether a vaccine can be found quickly, possibly even second or third waves. It just sounds awful, I have to say. So I wanted to end this session on a positive note, and maybe to hear final thoughts from all three of you about, are you optimistic that, for instance, when it comes to discussing the economy, lots of people have been talking about a V-shaped recovery, a W-shaped recovery. The idea that there could be revenge travel or, pent-up demand. Are you all optimistic that once things do, hopefully soon, return to normal, that there is something to look forward to in all your industries?
I am an optimist. I do believe that there is pent-up demand. There is, people want to fly, people want to travel, they want to visit places, they want to be able to see their loved ones, you know, their families again. So, you know, yes, it will recover. I think the big question is when and how long this is going to take. I think most analysts have pretty much said that they may not see a V-shaped recovery, partly because it takes a bit of time to get things back up and running again. And also, I do anticipate there'll be an initial period of fine-tuning and perhaps some confusion for the travelers as to what's required before they can get on a flight or they can book a ticket. So I think we'll take it, and governments also are unlikely to suddenly lift border restrictions. So I think what we're probably going to see is a gradual recovery as governments gain confidence, as the public, the traveling public gains some confidence because of the measures that have been put in place. And you know, slowly we will see the recovery, but I'm optimistic on the long-term outlook.
That's good to know. Vinu, Zulkifli?
I'm optimistic, but we have a long, hard journey in front of us because it's about courage, as was mentioned, but it's also about building confidence, and that is the task for all of us who are in the travel and tourism industry, is to get that confidence, to give governments that confidence that they can open the borders with courage, give travelers the confidence that, yes, I can fly safely, and I can fly safely when I want to. And we need to give confidence to the industry that we are still part of this wonderful thing called travel and tourism. And that's why we are having this conversation.
Excellent. And I guess final words, Zulkifli, are you optimistic? I guess, you know, I, for one, cannot wait to return to Malaysia, but, you know, are you optimistic that people will be coming back in huge waves if there's pent-up demand?
Of course, we have to be all optimistic, so much so for me in particular, working with the tourism board, if I say I'm not optimistic, then that is something that's not right. So the road to recovery is very long. It will be long, but surely we are on the road to recovery. For Malaysia, domestic travel has begun. We are seeing good numbers of people going out of their areas where they stay, interstate travel. We are seeing good bookings as reported by our home carriers. AirAsia in particular started their campaign for domestic flights, and they reported good bookings for Penang and also for Langkawi, and as well as other destinations. So domestic travel is well underway. International travel, of course, time will only tell, but a word of caution here to the traveler, whether you are domestic or international. Please follow, strictly adhere to all the standard operating procedure imposed by the relevant authorities, and be self-disciplined, particularly when you are traveling with small children, because they will be very difficult to control. They do not understand what is this COVID all about, much less talking about social distancing and so forth. So like I mentioned earlier, don't be the reason why you are going to be the reason for traveling to be stopped. So my last words to everyone, stay safe wherever you are, and hope for the best for all the industry players, whatever business you may be in. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. That is wonderful advice, I have to admit. And I have to say a very big thank you to our wonderful panelists. You've all been incredible. I know it's been an amazingly challenging time, but to come on today and to speak to us about those challenges that are facing your industries, and to give us some solutions, some insights about how it can be made better. Thank you once again, Beatrice Lim from the Association of Asia Pacific Airlines, Vinod Dole from IATA, and of course, Mr. Zulkifli Muhammad Saeed from Tourism Malaysia. Thank you, terima kasih, and it's been a great delight to moderate this session with you all in the last hour. And at this stage, I shall throw back to Paul at PATA headquarters in Bangkok. He is going to invite you all to the networking session afterwards. That's it from me. Thanks again.
Thank you, Sharjah, and once again, thank you, Beatrice, Vinoop, and Zulkifli. It's been a great session. I think we've learned a lot. You guys can all turn off your audio and visual. Oh, you guys, Dr. Musa's come back on. Oh, but actually, I think some of our speakers will be at our meet and greet. My team here will put the link in the chats. There it is. So just wanted to have some final last words before we end today's session. So once again, thanks to Tourism Malaysia for being our destination partner this week, and of course Dr. Musa and Mr. Zulkifli for speaking today, as well as our good friends at BBC World News, and of course, as well as IATA and AAPA for joining today. It's been a fantastic session, and I think we actually answered a lot of questions. I saw Vinoop and Dr. Musa actually answering a bunch of questions there. So really good job by our speakers for being on top of that. But if you have more questions, you can ask them during the meet and greet that's just after this. I think Dr. Musa had mentioned some of our other live experiences that are happening. You can look at the calendar of events at dream2travel.pata.org. Later today, we have a games and giveaways. That's by Tourism Malaysia. And of course, you mentioned there's a dark tourism storytelling session tomorrow. I think it's really interesting. I heard a bit about it, and I look forward to that as well. Also want to just keep everyone aware of our knowledge session on Thursday. So this will be an hour and a half webinar. This will be on sustainable tourism after COVID-19. That will be on Thursday, I think about, what time is it? It is at 3 p.m. So join us then. Look at the schedule, and thank you everyone for joining us today. And I'll see you at the meet and greet. It's from 11:30 to 12. Link is in the chat. Thank you very much. Take care and see you soon. Bye.